Okay, let's try this new setup. I hope it's better than what it's been. I'm going to do another video, and again it's all about tariffs. I promise it'll be my last one about tariffs. Today's the last day I ever want to talk about tariffs again. I stress, we're in the middle of a bloody election. American domestic policies are not our concerns when homeless people are sleeping in parks, and everywhere I look it's like the Great Depression. I don't care if the stock market's doing well. Stock market's not doing well, by the way. You just lost 10% of your super if your super was invested in stocks. We lost 10% of the stock market yesterday. We're all going to blame Trump for that, but why aren't we angry that the government forces us to prop up the Australian Stock Exchange with our superannuation? If we didn't invest in our stock exchange with our superannuation, stocks would be 50% of what they are today. Stocks have no relation on what a company's fortunes are. They're just beliefs of people. The stock market is a casino. But anyway, this is about tariffs and not the casino of the stock market and how we're forced to spend our super in a casino. But anyway, so I want to take you back to the 19, I just got to get this year right, 1986 and 1987. Okay, this article is more than 11 years old, it says, but this article would have been written when Wednesday the 1st of January. So yeah, Cabinet Papers had just been released, and that's another one of my favourite days in political news, is the the Cabinet Papers when they're released every year on New Year's Eve. It's one of New Year's Day. It's one of my big days, but like I say, my brain's not wired right. This is from The Guardian, by the way. The Hawke-Keating government are now seen as amongst the most reformist governments in Australia has had. But the 1986-87 Cabinet Papers reveal that the reformist process was slow and difficult. The government had sought to deal constantly with unions, business and interest groups who sought to undermine the reform in key areas such as industry assistance and industrial relations. The major industry assistance at the time was tariffs. This is 1986. Like, I want you to remind you of this because they all want you to take remember berries and think that this was a lot further back in history than it actually was. I watched this all happen in main time. I lived in one of Australia's 5 major industrial towns. Geelong and Newcastle used to have a fight every year to see which would be the most industrialised town in Australia. Sometimes they won it, and sometimes we won it. This is the town I grew up in. So yeah, the major industry assistance at the time was tariffs. In December 1986, the Cabinet considered a general reduction of tariffs, but rejected this as the Minister for Industry, John Button, noted such a move would inevitably draw comparisons with the 25% across-the-board tariff cut implemented by the Whitlam government. Button's submission referred to this as the 1973 experience. For a Labor government desperate to never appear like the Whitlam government, this argument ensured that the general economy-wide tariff cut would not occur. But the desire for reform and industry protection, pushed by Paul Keating, remained, and the textiles industry, which at the time was the most protected industry, was the focus of Cabinet deliberations. Across 1986 and 1987, in October 1986, Cabinet agreed that the new plan for the industry must achieve substantial reductions in the level of barrier assistance, while noting that the industry could generally be characterised by inadequate management, a narrow domestic focus. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's nothing wrong with companies having, like I had a job when they had a narrow domestic focus, a low technological base, and a poorly educated workforce. I was one of those poorly educated people. I didn't mind making bloody sneakers of Crosby shoes, eh? Like, the bloody pay was good for someone of my education, and they took that away from me when they took the tariffs away. So yes, I seem a little bit angry about these things, but they seriously affected my life for the entirety of my life. The unions and manufacturers at the time argued for 75... Oh, hang on. The industry assistant... Oh, where was I? I've lost my place. See what happens when people call me poorly educated workforce. Cabinet also noted that nearly 2/3 of the workforce are females and 47% of the total workforce are migrants. The Industries Assistance Commission recommended phasing down tariff protection for the entire industry to a 50% tariff by 1996. The unions and manufacturers at the time argued for 75% tariff. Now, Trump just put in a 10% tariff and we're jumping down like nothing. These are the government policies that destroyed my town, destroyed my life. I did a good job of destroying it myself, but Geelong became a drug-infested cesspool and a slum for 10 years after these policies were put in place. I just happened to be in that slum. But this was dismissed by Cabinet as it would not represent a substantial reduction in assistance. The Cabinet agreed in November 1987 to a reduction of a 60% tariff for clothing and 50% for footwear. And in a move familiar to that recently undertaken for Holden workers, the government also agreed for up to $200 million to be provided for appropriate industry, labour and regional adjustment programs. Industry relations in 1986 and 8 remained strongly centralised, but there were the seeds being sown by Treasurer Paul Keaton towards a more decentralised centralised. Just remember that, it was Labor that killed the unions. Like they introduced the legislation. In November 1980, Cabinet submission on the mark-free version of the Prices and Incomes Accord, Keating argued for a two-tiered wage system with a flat increase for all and a second cap increase. Within this fixed system, the logic of a need to move to a more flexible system was apparent. Keating's own submission noted that the second tier must allow a reasonable range of outcomes which can afford some flexibility at the industry enterprise level. Now this is going into other things that the Labor Party did. It goes into employment and industrial relations and that. But I just wanted to point out, one, it was the Labor Party who cut all these tariffs, and the cutting of these tariffs destroyed Geelong, Dandenong, Warrnambool, Wollongong, Newcastle, Western Sydney, Ipswich near Brisbane, the industrial areas of Brisbane, and still at this point, after looking at this all day, I still don't know where the industrial areas of Brisbane were, but I'm sure they were there and they were pretty big. We had a massive wool industry in this place. Geelong's a port city, by the way, which is why it had so many of these things. The goods could come into Australia so that we could make the goods. We're not so that's why towns like Geelong and Newcastle and that don't make heaps of products. Geelong made a lot of shirts. They made a lot of shoes. We made a lot of clothing. We made a lot of bed linen. We had woolen mills. We made carpets. We made all those things. Now we make none of those things. We still have Godfrey Hirst, but most of the stuff they sell is made overseas. Now, the reason that's important is, this is what Albanese said today. Well, I only heard about it today. Anthony Albanese invokes Team Australia in a pitch to buy local after Trump's tariffs. Anthony Albanese will urge Australians to buy local in a pre-election attempt to galvanise voter anger at Donald Trump. But after the US President refused to exempt Australian steel and aluminium from his tariff regime. One of Australia's biggest aluminium mills was in Geelong. Alcoa is one of the things that built Geelong. So, whoop-de-doo. Adamant that retailing with revenge tariffs would simply fuel domestic inflation, the Prime Minister instead invoked Team Australia in a flurry of radio calls on Wednesday afternoon. Australians can have an impact by buying Australian goods, he told. What Australian goods? That was the point of me saying everything that I said before about the reduction in the footwear tariffs and everything. We don't make any goods in Australia, so how the hell can we all go and buy us? What Australian goods are we meant to buy? Apart from the food that I put in my in my shopping basket, I don't understand what the hell else I get from this country. Right, so and the reason this upsets me so much is it's the Australian Labor Party who took away all the tariffs that were the protections that kept people like me in work. And once they were taken away, it was then possible for the exact same companies that had factories in Geelong to move those factories to China, still call themselves Australian companies, and sell the products that they make back to me as if they were paying me Australian minimum award wage. But we all know they're not. The government is weighing how to harness its own considerable purchasing power to support local business. Well, I don't know, unless they're buying cups of coffee down at the coffee shop. And consultancies. That's a big business that we have going now. Those contracts worth $100 billion in the last financial year, and Labor promised before the 2022 election that it would introduce new guidelines and I have no idea what they're actually buying that's Australian. Apart from construction products, so steel and cement, and quite frankly, our steel industry is so piss weak. If Australian government had to rely on it to actually build what we build in Australia, we wouldn't have enough steel. The steel plants that we have in this country are older than me, and there's been no investment in them. So I don't know why we're so upset about our steel industry. After we took away all the tariffs, the people who make steel went, what's the point of investing here? And they went and built the world's biggest, most advanced steel mills in China, and that's where most of our steel comes from. Why would we buy steel from a 100-year-old or a 70-year-old steel mill in Whyalla when we can buy steel from the most modern, most efficient, makes the best steel on the planet, that was built in China and finished being built 2 years ago? So all I can say is if we're building nuclear power plants, please don't put Australian steel in them. Like, seriously, By taking away our tariffs, we became a backward country that relied our CSIRO. Nobody makes anything. Tariffs, taking away our tariffs has been a disaster for the common people in this country. It's been a disaster for the country as a whole, like as a whole society. It's been very good for the 1%. Taking away tariffs have meant that people like Gino Reinhardt could get so bloody rich it's not funny. We have politicians who have multi-million-dollar stock portfolios. What's the go with that? Right? So these people who benefit from the taking away of tariffs are now upset that tariffs are coming in. Myself, I find it very funny. But I also find it very angry that they're trying to member bury us into thinking that when we had tariffs, life was horrible. Because life got horrible after we took them away. I don't remember life being horrible when we had them. In fact, I could leave school uneducated at the age of 14 and go straight onto a factory assembly line. Now if I want a nice pair of Adidas shoes, that assembly line is in Indonesia or China or Vietnam these days. Which is why Trump's attacking Vietnam the way he is. One, that they lost the war and he's got a hang-up about that. He's old enough to have a hang-up about that. And number two is he's hoping that Adidas will bring their factories back to America. And when you look at a price of an Adidas shoe, costs you $120, but costs Adidas less than $10 to make. So they're already charging you the same cost as if they're already paying somebody like me in a factory in Geelong to make their shoes, right? So what difference does it make to them? Oh, that's right, they lose a big chunk of their profit margin, but they're still making a profit. So that's that. Now just one more thing that I'd like to show people. This is from a report from the Geelong City Council to the Australian Productivity Commission on tariffs. It was done in 2005. And I've just outlined one thing. This is a massive report that goes forever and ever, but it's really good if you want to learn about tariffs, how we lost tariffs in this country. I spent all day reading reports like this, by the way. The Productivity Commission has recommended that tariffs be frozen at 2005 levels until 2010 and then cut to 5% in 2010, with the exception of clothing, towel and bed linen tariffs. This is from the Council of Geelong. These were fundamental industries that we had, and by 2005 most of them were gone, which, well, I'm so surprised this is actually written so late. Which are cut to 10% and then further to 5% in 2015. Of all the options presented in the position paper, this is clearly the most preferred, but we consider this is all too severe in the market confronting Australia's TCFL, that's textiles, clothing, footwear and linen companies over the next decade. The City of Geelong has previously argued that the scheduled tariff cuts for the 1st of January 2005 should not be implemented as our major trading partners have not yet reduced their trade barriers to the same extent. That's very important. When Paul Keaton, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan all sat down together and worked out how we were going to do this, and also representatives from the EU, I think that was about it. Russia was falling apart at the moment and everyone was rubbing their hands with glee about how they were all going to get it cut. But yeah, the people I remember from back then is Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher and Bob Hawke. Right, they all got along so wonderfully well. They were constantly at world forums together. our maiden, but yeah, Australia was the only one to actually agree, who did all the things that we agreed to do back then, and nobody else did. Meaning we were up shit creek without a paddle. Thanks Bob Hawke and Paul Keating for that. We do not resile from this position. However, if the federal government is insisting on going ahead with these cuts, we're talking about tariffs, then there should certainly be no further tariff reductions implemented after 2010, unless there are demonstrable. Now, we took the tariffs away to the point that we just don't have these industries in Australia. We have one or two companies that make Ugg boots, and another company that makes teddy bears. Matching cuts in assistance on the world scene. We note that the Commission believes these relatives are irrelevant, but nothing could be further from the truth, as the industry must make its decisions based on its position in the global textile, clothing, footwear and linen industry supply chain. I think that's very important. That was written in 2005 by the Geelong City Council. At that time, Geelong City was an absolute slum. We were still recovering from all those things that the Hawke Labor Keating government did in the 80s. It completely decimated the town that I lived in, and that's why the town of Geelong swims in ice today. I'll tell you another place that swims in ice today, Newcastle. Another place, Dandenong. Another place, Frankston. I'm Victorian, that's why I'm naming these industrial heartlands all dotted around Melbourne that were been there for 100 years before I was born. So before you start, ask yourself why the entire left was all for tariffs and against cutting tariffs right up until the 2000s. But now, because Donald Trump is introducing tariffs are bad. And the other thing that's really spinny is I'm now seeing news articles trying to member bury me. That's from The Simpsons, by the way. That's got to be one of the best Simpsons episodes ever. They're now trying to convince me that the reason we had the Second World War was because of tariffs. That's some 1984 stuff. It's the only way I can explain that. If you believe that, I really suggest you look into history books. We didn't have World War II because there was too many tariffs in the world. That's all I've got to say. Everybody stay safe and happy. I know my videos aren't happy videos. Oh, on my videos, my last video got over 60 views. My friend was ringing me up to tell me that I'd accidentally smoked a bong in my video, which is true. I'd just like to point out that I have a script from a doctor saying that I can smoke weed, and weed's legal weed's legal in Australia if you get it from the chemist, and you've got a script from the doctor, and that's what I do. I was going to take it down, and I really freaked out about it, but in the morning when I went to take it down, it had over 60 views, and I'm really rapt about that. If I get 10 views, I'm over the moon. 60's like getting 5,000 replies on Twitter or something. I'm not on Twitter, by the way, but yeah, it was a real rush, so thank you for watching that. I will say I find it really funny that YouTube age restricted a video that I just put up because it had clips from a news article on Channel 9, and I cut those clips off YouTube, and where I cut them from there's no age restriction on the video, but my video got an age restriction from that, and looking at the news clip, it probably deserves an age restriction. I'm certainly not complaining about it, but I find it amusing that got one, and the video I was about to take down because I was freaked out that YouTube might kick me off YouTube. did really, really well. So is that what I need to do to get viewers? Accidentally have bongs in my videos? That's my little joke for the day. Everybody stay safe. Be happy. Remember all the big news stories that they put in the news and on the media. What's more important is your localised life. Concentrate on that and life will get better. Things like what the government's doing and what Trump and that's doing, even though it may affect our lives, there's nothing we can do to stop these things. The best thing we can do is adapt. And remember, if you're entitled to redress, chances are you will win a civil lawsuit. Go see a lawyer. Your first visit will probably be free. Everybody have a good day. Goodbye.